Thank you very much, Relato. Good afternoon. I know this is called almost a graveyard session. So the good thing from me is that I will not say anything new. Most of you have been at the previous last year's annual conference where there was also an update from SADC, and unfortunately not much has happened then. Maybe that's what I would talk about. Thanks again for Tralac for inviting me, but also for inviting SADC Secretariat. In fact, my director was invited to come and make this presentation, and now I'm standing in her shoes. So I'm not necessarily the Paul you used to hear. So I have to be a bit cautious of what I'm saying. We know that SADC's integration, I think, is known. The framework for integration is really in the context of the regional indicative strategic development plan, which is really having an ambition to foster free flow of factors of production in the region. That is underpinning mostly our regional economic integration kind of platform. But SADC has also other platforms, particularly political stability, peace and security, which was probably the rationale a little bit for its formation. And it appears that probably at that front, more resources are being channeled to politics and stability, looking at issues related to Madagascar, Zimbabwe, etc., than much more regional economic integration. Infrastructure development is also a pillar. I'm not going to say much, except the fact that last year, SADC has now adopted what they call a regional infrastructure master plan, which details what needs to be done and how much resources need to be mobilized to improve the region's infrastructure. SADC is also having regard to macroeconomic stability. We also not go through that much, but this is basically a commitment of SADC member states to converge on macroeconomic indicators such as inflation, budget deficit to GDP ratio, etc. They have targets that they need to be within in a particular time frame. And on that front, I think things are not necessarily bad, and I think most of the SADC economies have really improved on macroeconomic indicators related to stability issues. Few pockets of instability here and there, but I think the region has done very well if you look at those indicators. My talk briefly will be more on trade, seeing that this is a trade law center annual conference. And on the trade front, you know from the RISDP, SADC has milestones starting from free trade area to customs union, common market, monetary union, and eventually an economic union. And I could now say probably that SADC is quite stuck at the first level on the free trade area, and this is a major preoccupation. There is a midterm review of the RISDP in progress at the moment. I was asked to say something about it. I can't say much because this review is being done by independent consultants whose report is not yet out. But this report will be discussed by the SADC summit this year, and we'll see whether SADC will still have a commitment to the RISDP, or there will be some rethinking of its integration approach. Of course, there is also now a commitment to participate in the tripartite FTA, which we discussed this morning, largely because a number of SADC countries are really confronted with the problem of overlapping membership. As of this end of last year, at least beginning 1st of January 2013, we can now officially say that SADC is an effective free trade area. At least if we look at the level of tariff on intra-SADC trade. Most countries have implemented their tariff phase down commitment, which they have committed themselves to do over a period of 8 years until 2008, and there were sensitive products that needed to be phased down till 2012. So we would say that most countries who participate in this FTA, they have reached that level. We have few pockets of challenges for some countries, namely Malawi and Zimbabwe. We know Mozambique has been given an extended period that runs up to 2015 with respect on imports from South Africa. We also have problems that have emerged in Tanzania. This information is public. We have been conducting the audits on how member states are implementing the protocol, and the last audit was done for 2012, and most of this information have been confirmed. But we'll note that Malawi has always been behind schedule. They have faced quite a number of problems, I think mostly related to pressure on public revenue. But as of last year, Malawi has made quite an extensive progress in actually reaching its tariff phase down schedule with respect to all SADC countries except South Africa. You will recall that when SADC countries were negotiating tariff liberalization, they made two offers, one to themselves as SADC member states and one differentiated offer to South Africa. So there are still problems related to Malawi on imports from South Africa, which have not yet reached duty free. Zimbabwe has also been a bit problematic. They did apply for derogation not to phase down their tariffs on what was known or what is known as category C products. These are sensitive products. But most of this challenge really relates to the tariff situation between Zimbabwe and South Africa because of that differentiated offer. And at the moment, there is quite serious discussions between the two countries, as South Africa is not necessarily satisfied that Zimbabwe is not implementing its tariff offer fully. Tanzania is also a bit problematic because they have decided to reintroduce tariffs which were already zero on sugar and paper products, an issue which is still being debated in the Committee of Trade Ministers. We already heard this morning Angola, DRC, and Seychelles are not part of the SADC FTA yet, although Seychelles has now put an offer on the table which is being negotiated in the Trade Negotiation Forum. So maybe a point to note here, and also relating to our discussion this morning, when it comes to tariff, substantial progress has been made by SADC up to now. The problem really lies with in the process of negotiating these tariff offers, there were exclusions, products or tariff lines that were not covered under the agreement. And in some cases, as I listed there, these are quite important products for intra-regional trade. Things like prepared foodstuff, beverages, live animals and animal products, mineral products, some precious stones, etc., etc. So these are still excluded from that tariff-free regime which we are talking about, which is also making it difficult in the tripartite negotiations, knowing that other RECs, COMESA and EAC, are actually duty-free RECs. SADC itself has not yet achieved that status because of these exclusions. We also have a sugar problem. They say sugar is a political good. It is governed by another protocol, annex, and there are problems that within SADC about it, whether this should continue or this is should not continue. There are problems between sugar producers and sugar consuming countries. And it's also likely to be a problem issue when you start negotiating the tripartite FTA, knowing that that is more of a duty-free regime, although even within COMESA, sugar has also came up occasionally as a problematic issue raised by Kenya. Thereby Kenya has applied under COMESA to have a safeguard mechanism that is also protecting domestic sugar industry there. Rules of origin continue to be a problem in SADC. This morning it was mentioned that no, it appears that it's no more a problem. There is a debate around it. As we know, textile and clothing still faces double stage transformation. Those countries that belonged to MMTZ then, who were given a quota, a regime to export to SACU on a single stage transformation, don't have that anymore. At the moment, they are not happy with particular rules of origin on textile and clothing. It is also important to note that even within the tripartite context, the debate is not necessarily say rules of origin in COMESA and EAC are less restrictive. And I think we will probably get more from particularly the last presentation when we are talking about this global value chain, that even the value-added product criteria on rules of origin is probably affected by the way global production takes place today. So that makes also COMESA EAC rules of origin not particularly simpler in terms of restrictiveness. So it's going to be a huge issue in the negotiations. While these tariff barriers have declined, we have seen an increase in non-tariff barriers. Almost every week, we're having complaints of reported NTBs. I think Vilmina has talked about the NTB mechanism, where we are monitoring the NTBs that are being imposed on traded goods within the region. So they are a problem. Most of these NTBs are not just a truck being held at the border for 24 hours or 3 days, but are more policy and regulatory ones. They cannot just be solved through a telephone. They will be called. They can only be solved by many countries making reform on trade policy reform, particularly on quantitative import or export restrictions. issues related to SPS, TBT, etc. And most of the NTBs are mostly related to borders. It's not necessarily just customs. It's just when a product gets to the border, it experiences a lot of barriers of entry. And that is what we are now starting to see. Maybe it's good that we have reduced tariffs. Now we are starting to see the importance of non-tariff barriers in terms of enhancing regional trade. Therefore, trade facilitation, as we have spoken about in the previous session, becomes now so important. Or maybe before I proceed, maybe an important development that has taken place is also that there seems to be a near policy consensus among SADC member states that the idea of moving further with other milestones should be halted a bit, and they must consolidate the SADC FTA and deal with this trade facilitation problem. And I think it's an important positive signal that there is a policy awareness to deal with issues of trade facilitation. We have talked about trade in services. It has commenced, negotiations have commenced. There is a draft protocol. There is now an institutional framework to negotiate certain sectors that I have mentioned there, and transport is also one of them, and this can be nicely linked to also the previous session. But it appears the appetite from policymakers of advancing this agenda is not there. It's not there, I think, because our trade officials and ministries of trade, they're not used to this type of issues. They are used to tariffs and rules of origin. When you want to start talking about transport or telecommunications, they wash their hands. This is not their territory. Unfortunately, the people who are involved in those sectors in member states, they also not then participating in the trade policy process. So it's quite a new agenda. It's very challenging. The capacity to enhance that agenda is relatively weak at national level. So ministers have now agreed that they're concentrating for the next 2 years or so on consolidating the FTA. And we have analyzed what needs to be consolidated, what needs to be improved, and it's all those issues related to trade facilitation. They have adopted a matrix of action on those issues, whether it's standards, whether it's rules of origin, whether it's technical regulations, intellectual property rights. So there is a matrix of action that needs to be implemented for the next 2 years in the consolidation of the FTA. It's also important to note that consolidating this would really mean work at the national level, because that's where the protocol is being implemented. And implementation is relatively weak at the national level. The Secretariat has managed to mobilize resources now. We have a trade facility that is basically to be used by member states who are having problems in implementing the commitments they have made in the trade protocol. And that program will be starting in the second half of this year. So it's a positive development, I think, to see that there is a little bit of a commitment to implement some of those challenges on the FTA. I just want to, other areas really related to standard and accreditation issues. I'm not going to read what is on the board, but an important aspect is that SADC has now set up a SADC accreditation agency in Botswana, where many countries that do not have facilities to have their goods accredited in meeting international standards can now have access to that body. Of course, the body came as a result of donor funding, and donors are also pulling out, and it's the issue that now member states are grappling with on how to finance such a body. But it is a specific issue which needs attention because it's also a trade facilitation issue.